We are about halfway through the 2017 tennis calendar. Two majors have been played: the Australia Open and the French Open, with Wimbledon and U.S. Open to come. And in terms of the other Master Series events and the other tournaments, again, about halfway through. Um, it's it's difficult to give a timetable. With that being said, though, with Roger Federer winning the Australian Open and then with Rafael Nadal uh, coming back and winning the French Open, his 10th Roland Garros title, very impressive. There's been a lot of discussion about who's the greatest tennis player of all time. Um, is it somebody who is playing now? Is it a former player? How do you determine the greatest tennis player of all time? So I wanted to make a video just giving, as a big tennis fan and player, giving my opinion on the uh, debate over who's the greatest men's tennis player of all time. Um, Before I do that, I would mention I usually am not a huge fan of these sorts of debates over who's the greatest of all time in any sport. I think they're kind of silly, to be honest with you, because there's no real way to um, determine it. How do you determine it? Because players from different eras are not going to play, and even if they did, it wouldn't be fair because they'd be a different age, and so it's just really impossible. With tennis, because there's tournaments and there's a lot of numbers, maybe it's easier actually than other sports to compare. But again, it's still so difficult with comparing players of different eras. It's just almost impossible. But I'm gonna attempt to do it. If you want, you can comment or let me know who you think is the greatest player of all time. I'm sure there's a lot of strong opinions out there, but I just wanted to give my opinion on it. When I was looking at this, both looking at players that are retired and then looking at the active players and looking at all their statistics, their style of play, how strong they are on the different surfaces, I narrowed my greatest player of all time, men's player of all time, to four different guys. And they are um, Pete Sampras, and this is not in order: Pete Sampras, Roger Federer, Rafael Nadal, and Novak Djokovic. Those are the four men that I think right now are in the discussion to be the greatest player of all time. A lot of I would give some. I have to give mention to people like Rod Laver, and there's a few others, especially going back before the Open era. Um, Rod Laver definitely deserves a mention. That's one. It's difficult to compare him because, again, as I mentioned, it's a little bit of a different era. But especially, that's how I narrowed it down to those four: Sampras, Federer, Nadal, and Djokovic. Of course, as I make this video, Sampras is retired, but three of those four are active: Federer, Nadal, and Djokovic. The easiest way I think you can determine who's the greatest player of all time is major trophies, Grand Slam tournament trophies. How many did they win? So let's discuss that. Federer leads them all with 18. Nadal is second with 15. He just won his 15th at Roland Garros. Sampras has 14 and Djokovic is at 12. So if you just want to rank them like that, there you go. I think it's a lot more complex than that because the tennis calendar is so long. While the majors are, of course, the most important tournaments of the year, there's lots of other factors to discuss, and you have to take surface into um, comparison. And the Masters 1000 series events are so important, and some of them are so big. Some of them you'll have a 96 player field, which is almost as big as the majors, and you do have to strongly factor those tournaments in. Okay, as I sit here right now, this is my list for top player, and this is in order. So right now, I have Federer at number one with those 18 major trophies. I have Nadal at two with 15 trophies. I have Sampras at three with 14, and I have Djokovic a close fourth with 12. The reason I have Federer right now at one is, I have to be honest, that 18 number, the fact that he has three more than Nadal, If you look at roughly the span from 2003 to 2007, he was so dominant, um, and he's continued that basically almost 10 years after that dominance ended. So he's been a top 3 player in the world for almost 12 years now, which is very impressive. And although he has never been dominant or really even close to being dominant on clay, he's only has that one Roland Garros title. He has been able to be. He's probably maybe most famous for being strong on the grass at Wimbledon. But if you look at his hard courts, he's been great on the hard courts, and he has several U.S. Open titles, and so that's why I have him at number one. It's close, very close, but I have him at number one. Nadal I have at number two, and I have to say the gap between Federer and Nadal for me is razor tight. That 15 to 18, it was tough for me to put Nadal over Federer because of that number. But here are the um, arguments that I could strongly make for having Nadal ranked over Federer. Number one, that 10 French Open titles is so impressive. Clay is a very difficult surface, and a lot of players actually, especially in Europe, are clay is the biggest surface, and to have those 10 titles for me is so impressive. But he has Nadal, that is, has worked so hard on spraying his game across in the grass and the hard court. So if you look at, he broke through and won the 2008 Wimbledon, and then he has also been able to win both in Australia and in New York at the U.S. Open. And he's not just a clay courter. That is so unfair if anyone tried to say that. I don't think anyone would at this point if you look at what he's done. The other thing that Nadal has going, there's two other things that Nadal has going for him over Federer in this discussion, which is number one, he has a much better head-to-head record. I wouldn't say he's owned the head-to-head, but he does have an edge in head-to-head, and that has got to count for something. Because if they play each other, who wins? That is who's better. And they've played so many times, and Nadal has a better record against Federer in those head-to-head meetings. And the second thing is Nadal actually has more Masters 1000 Series titles than Federer does, and that should count for something. But with all of that being said, I do still, at the present point, rank Federer as the greatest player of all time, just ahead of Nadal. Third, I have Pete Sampras. Pete Sampras, with those 14 major titles, he was never able to break through and win the French Open. You know, his style of huge serve and power attacking tennis just never quite translated to the clay. But still, if you look at him when he was on top of his game in the 90s, he was almost unbeatable at Wimbledon and then on a lot of the hard courts, especially at the U.S. Open. He was just such a dominant player, and that's why I think you could still make a strong case that he's not the greatest player of all time, especially if you're just singling it out to grass or even on the hard courts as well, because of that serve and just the way how overpowering he was in his prime. Then fourth, Djokovic, who again is active. It's tough to put him in the category with Nadal and Federer right now, just because he only has those 12 major trophies, and with Federer and the Nadal being at 18 and 15, Djokovic is just a little bit behind. But 12 is just a very impressive number. He's still active, and he's a little bit younger than Nadal and Djokovic, so he still does probably maybe have more time. And although he's been struggling a little bit lately, if you look at his dominant years, he was just as, if not more dominant in those years than Federer was in his prime dominant years. And also, Djokovic leads everyone in prize money, which does matter because it signifies the ability to play well across the year in all tournaments. And also, Djokovic leads in the Masters 1000 titles. So we'll see. Djokovic really just has got to win some more majors in order to be able to really get into a strong debate with Nadal and Federer. So that's my ranking right now. I have Federer 1, Nadal 2, Sampras 3, Djokovic 4. But this discussion is so fluid, it can change pretty much month to month, which is crazy to say for who's the best ever. But that's what happens when you have three players playing at the same time who are all in this discussion and are all so closely jumbled together. It's so much fun. I think we're all very excited for Wimbledon, and then the summer hard courts, and which of course um, end with the U.S. Open, and all of these tournaments are just so important. And I think we should all enjoy watching these guys. And then you never know. Hopefully, there's some younger players, whether they've turned pro yet or not, that can get into this discussion. Um, it's going to be tough because that bar is set so high, and there's so much depth right now that to win multiple majors is really tough. But if we see that dominant player come along, I think everyone would love to see that, and maybe have some more guys get into this discussion for the greatest of all time. So thank you for watching this video. Let me know what your list is, and let's get ready for some great tennis coming up. Thanks again for watching.